So we talked about Jesus in the last video that I recorded, how he was son of a black carpenter and living a small Ethiopian carpentry community living in Eretz Israel that was left over from the time of Solomon building the temple. Queen of Sheba had sent them, Makeda had sent them to help. And so regardless, Shep Ben Yosef or just a rabbi that kind of rebelled and went crazy. If you want to check out that video, I'll put something at the end there. This is about Paul. So modern Christians love this dude Paul. And he used to be called Saul of Tarsus. He was Jewish working for the Sanhedrin. And this took me like 10 years to find. So that's what broke me away from Christianity initially. I read the Gospels for 4 years, 14 to 18. I had them by 18 pretty much memorized, and I could turn to any page, read the like first line or two, and then tell you everything that was on the page. Not word for word, but the gist of like literally everything, every story. And then I started reading Paul around 18, and I was like, I should start reading. Well, I was reading all the random books. So I had read the Torah a bunch of times, and then I was just going through all the rest of the books and reading them randomly. And every time I'd read Paul, I'd be like, dude, this guy teaches something totally different, in places especially. I was like, he's not teaching the same thing in Jesus at all. Like, this is crazy. Like, what is he saying? And there's some things that are in line, but big like discrepancies, especially with this whole faith thing. It's like faith, it's not by works but by faith alone. All that's completely opposite. Jesus is all about the works. He says you don't even have to believe, even if you don't believe in me, believe in the works. And his brother has a gospel, James, that says faith without works is dead. And if you look in the book of Revelation, it's all like by their works, by their works, by their works. It's repeated over and over and over. And so, and that was one of many things. But I had a lot of beef with him. I had a guy come to me in school, and I started telling people about this. And when I went to college, I was in the music department, and this guy was like a hardcore Christian come up to me in front of everyone. I was hanging out with the Rosses. I was already starting to grow my dreads. I had like long dreads. I think I was like a little older. I was like 20 at this time. I'd already gotten into Rastafari. Started learning about other religions, studied all different kinds of things, but it kind of settled on Rastafari. It was kind of somewhere in between Christianity and Judaism. Much more into Jewish ties, though, in a lot of ways. I did the whole video about Rastafari and the tribe of Dan. But this guy came and like, we were in like the quad of the music building, and he just starts berating me. Paul is the man. All the modern born again Christians are apologetics. And he just was like, Paul is the man. How could you? Just shaming me in front, trying to shame me in front of everybody. And I was like, all right, bud, like whatever you feel, but you don't have to come do this like this. You try to embarrass me in front of everybody and put me down. And then years later, like 4 years later, as he read more, he's like, you're right. Sorry. You're totally right, man. It totally does teach you different teachings. And now there's like books in academia. Back then, it was so many years ago. Didn't seem like a lot of people said this, or maybe just didn't have the balls to say it. And now I feel like there's a bunch of books in academia that teach it. But anyway, that was my first break from it all, where I was like, I don't know if I agree with any of this. Years later, like 10, 15 years later, I actually found out through humanistic Jews. So I talked about the girl I dated for like 9.5, almost 10 years. We didn't get married because I never converted. It cost so much money. I was always this like poor person, just like to study scripture and work odds and then jobs. And most of the conversions, I knew I had Jewish roots, and the rabbi said I'd have an easy conversion. It's like a short guru. I don't have to do so much. But or like I'm pretty sure. I'm like 95% sure we have Jewish roots. I don't have any proof or papers or like pedigree. I basically don't have any Jewish pedigree. Is what it comes down to. I don't have my AKC papers for Judaism. So I'm not officially like breed specific something, but anyway, uh, in that I through her parents were like humanistic Jews, so they're basically just atheists that do the Jewish holidays and everything by custom. So they'll still keep Jewish holidays and do the customs, but they don't believe in God. Like her parents were like hardcore atheists, and so I through a newsletter, ironically, that they had given out, they talked about how Paul and you know they're more willing to share secrets because they don't really care of all the like hardcore religious stuff. So they talked about how Paul never stopped working for the Sanhedrin. It's like well documented in Judaism that he was originally a persecutor. He was against all the Christians, but he at one point the Sanhedrin realized that it was like the blood of the martyrs. It was spreading the faith more than it was doing anything to stop it. So they decided they need to take a different approach. It wasn't working. So Paul continued to work for them. He came up with this story of, you know, seeing a miracle and so he could get in with the Christians, but they decided that they need to separate him from Judaism. Like if they're gonna, this religion's gonna explode and all these people are gonna be a part of it, they need to get him away from like mainstream rabbinic Judaism. And so that was his mission. So instead of like going after him, persecuting him, he joined them and then just started teaching different teachings and like getting them away from Judaism the best he could so that they wouldn't interfere with rabbinic Judaism or start considering themselves Jews and arguing with the rabbis and causing problems and, you know, flipping over tables, throwing what basically amounts to temper tantrum. Jesus kind of did. I mean, it's entire, if you watch the video on Jesus, that's what he basically did, is he threw a bunch of temper tantrums. His entire movement was a giant temper tantrum based on a misunderstanding with the chief rabbi. So he basically, that's what was Paul's job, was to get Christians away from rabbinic Judaism and let them start their own thing. That's what they're going to do. Let them go do that. And if you read it and you actually have reading comprehension and you're not willing to lie to yourself, you can see it. If you read the Gospels, like I say, most of which comes from the Tanakh, most of his quotes are like straight out the Tanakh, half at least, probably more like 70%, 80%, then Paul is teaching a totally different teaching. So that was, but I learned it through these humanistic Jews in a newsletter for Pesach or something. We went for Pesach and they had their newsletter. So I was reading through it and they had this story about Paul and I was like, I knew it. I knew this dude was not teaching the same teaching. And yeah. And so that's one of the ideologies. And a lot of people, modern Christians, love Paul, but dude was on his own trip and he was meant to separate it. So it's funny thing. So like for my daughter, for you, my dearest, we cover the bread on Shabbos, on Shabbat. We cover the challah and we make kiddush first. And that's literally to separate us from Christians. Christians also, we just bend the knee now. Instead of getting down, Christians and Muslims kneel. And that was something Jews did. We did originally. And we stopped doing it to separate ourselves from them. And so we cover the challah because the challah should be blessed first. And Christians, which you won't know this, being Jewish, they kind of do like a weird Shabbat thing, like mimic, the services are very similar actually, like a Jewish Shabbos service, which you don't really go. Your mom's not religious, and I haven't been going recently because of everything that happened with her. But it's very similar to a Christian one, like a Catholic one or something. But they do the bread first, and then they do the wine, and it's similar to the kiddush. They have weird body and blood things about it, which I'm not even gonna get into, and why, like it symbolism, but it's weird. Like blood is forbidden, so it's weird symbolism and cannibalism. But another story. Uh, but we cover the bread and make kiddush first, and then we bless the challah. And it's a beautiful lesson in that, like, we're not, if we go through so much trouble to cover the challah and make kiddush first, not to shame the challah. So if we'll do that for bread, how much more important is it not to shame somebody, like a person who's a whole universe? And I always love that like story of it. But that's why we cover the challah, because really it should be the first blessing. And motzi is before hagafen. And so we don't do that. We make hagafen first, and then we do the motzi. And so, and it's because of like being separated from Christians. So that was the intention. Paul was sent out to take this movement and get it away from rabbinic Judaism. Another ideology I want to put out there as we go to war with some of these ideologies: with love, be loving, be kind, and so I want to wish everyone the blessing of not shaming others. So if you believe in this, I'm sorry. I'm not trying to shame you for your beliefs. It's if we go through so much trouble not to shame a loaf of bread, the last thing I want to do is to shame anybody for their beliefs. We all are on a journey. And so I wish everyone the blessing of not shaming others and not feeling ashamed, hopefully nobody will shame you in this life, because we're all students, we're all teachers, we're all on a journey. And so I wish this blessing for everyone. And let's do this, people. Save the humans.
Trying to be a better man. Oh yeah. Trying to do the best I can. Oh yeah. And I'm gonna do right thing. Do right thing. No matter what they want to say. And I'm gonna still fight for you. Still fight for you.